My name is Maren Holt. I'm 36 years old, and I'm a licensed general contractor. Last 4th of July, at a cookout on a deck I built with my own 2 hands, my mother set a manila folder down next to the potato salad, slid a heavy silver pen across my patio table, and said the sentence she had clearly been practicing in the mirror for weeks. "Sign it, sweetheart. Or as far as I'm concerned, you are not my daughter anymore." The folder was open. I could see the header from where I stood, holding a tray of corn I never got to serve. Quitclaim deed, my address, my lake house, the one I had bled for, the one I had rebuilt board by board for 8 years, sitting inside a folder my mother brought to a barbecue like a side dish. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I set the tray down, looked at her, and asked the only question that mattered. "Since when does my house need your signature page?" Nobody laughed. And here's the part that still wakes me up at night. Nobody looked surprised, either. Not my sister Brooke. Not her husband Grant, standing at my grill with my spatula in his hand. They looked at me the way you look at the last person in the room to hear the news. Like the decision had already been made somewhere. I wasn't invited, and my part was just to hold still while it happened. But here's what none of them knew that afternoon. 40 minutes away, in a county records building that smells like old paper and toner, there was already a document with my name on it. A document one of the people at that barbecue had put there quietly, months earlier, hoping I would never look. And when I finally pulled it into the light, it turned a family Christmas into the most expensive dinner any of them will ever eat. I need to back up, because before you understand what they tried to take, you need to understand what kind of woman they thought they were taking it from. I didn't go to college. At 18, while my classmates were comparing dorm rooms, I signed on as a carpenter's apprentice with a framing crew out of Alder Falls, Minnesota. I was the only girl on the site, and the men had a betting pool on how many weeks I'd last. Winters on a roof deck when the wind comes off the lake like a blade. Summers in attics hot enough to soften the glue in your boots. I outlasted every man who bet against me, and a few who ran the pool. By 29, I had my general contractor's license and a truck with my name on the door. Holt Restoration. 1 woman, 1 truck, and a waiting list that ran into next season. Construction taught me the only philosophy I have ever needed. A building doesn't care what you meant to do. It doesn't care about your feelings, your excuses, or your family's opinion of you. It only cares whether the work was done right. Load either transfers to the foundation, or the whole thing comes down. There is no in between. My dad understood that. Ray Holt, roofer, 38 years on other people's rooftops. Hands so cracked from weather they looked like old leather gloves. He was the one who slipped me his wooden level, the long one with the brass ends, the day my mother announced that the trades were no life for a lady. He winked and said, "A bubble doesn't lie, kiddo. People will. The bubble won't." I have carried that level onto every job site of my life. He died 6 years ago. Fell on a February morning. Not from a roof, but in his own driveway. Heart giving out before the ambulance cleared the highway exit. He carried a life insurance policy his entire working life. The kind of quiet, unglamorous protection men like him believe in. $200,000, paid directly to my mother. I never asked about that money. Not once. It was hers, and I figured my father had earned her the right to never worry again. Remember that money. Remember that I never touched it, never asked about it, never saw a statement. Because that $200,000 is a loaded gun in this story, and it goes off later exactly where you least expect it. There's one more thing you need to know about me, and it's small and boring, which is exactly why it wins wars. Every single working day since I was 18, I fill out a site diary. Date, location, hours, materials, weather, who said what. It's a habit my first foreman beat into me. When your work is the thing holding a roof over a family's head, you keep records, because the day something goes wrong, memory is worthless and paper is king. I have 18 years of those diaries in weatherproof boxes, every page in my own handwriting. My family used to tease me about them. Maren and her little notebooks. They stopped teasing at Christmas. By then, my little notebooks had them surrounded. So that's who was standing on that deck holding a tray of corn. A woman who builds things that pass inspection, who documents everything, and who had spent her whole life being useful to a family that mistook her silence for softness. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever been the reliable one? The one who shows up with the tools and the truck, and slowly realized your family had you filed under equipment instead of person? If you have, tell me about it in the comments, because for 36 years I thought I was the only one. What my father left me turned out to matter more than the level and more than his lessons. He left me a way of seeing. Check the load path. Trust the bubble, not the people. And when something smells like it's burning behind a wall, you do not go back to sleep. You open the wall. That 4th of July, standing over a folder with my address typed on it, I caught that smell. I didn't know yet which wall the fire was hiding in. I didn't know it had been smoldering for months, or whose hand had struck the match, or that the sweetest voice at that table belonged to the person holding the gasoline. Finding out would cost me my mother. Keeping quiet would have cost me everything else. I know now which one was the bargain. Before we go any further, do one small thing for me. Subscribe so you're here when the rest of this unfolds, because I promise you have not guessed the ending, and type the country you're watching from down in the comments. I read every single one, and I would love to say hello to you, just to see how far this story of mine has traveled. Wherever you are, pull up a chair, because the next thing I have to show you is the house itself. And once you understand what that house cost me, you'll understand why I burned my family down to keep it. 8 years ago, I bought a drowning cottage on Sparrow Lake, 20 minutes outside Alder Falls. It was a foreclosure, $135,000, and every cent of the $27,000 down payment came out of a savings account I had been feeding since my first apprentice paycheck at 18. The loan officer at the credit union shook my hand at closing like she was apologizing for the place. The sills were rotten. The roof had a sway in it like an old horse's back. The plumbing was a rumor. Raccoons had been holding meetings in the crawl space, and judging by the mess, attendance was strong. I stood in that wreck on the day I got the keys and felt something I had never felt in any house my family owned. I felt the load path. I could see exactly what was broken and exactly how to fix it, and every bit of the fixing was mine to do. It sat on the water. It was failing in ways I understood, and it was mine. I gave that house 8 years of weekends, and every skill I ever bled for. I jacked the structure and re-poured the piers myself. I tore the roof to the rafters and rebuilt it, and I nailed the last ridge cap on the anniversary of my father's death. Sitting up there alone at sunset with his level balanced on my knees, watching the bubbles sit dead center, telling him goodnight the only way I know how. I gutted the plumbing. I rebuilt the boathouse into a workshop, and his level hangs on the wall above the bench. Brass ends polished from 18 years of my hands. New windows. New dock, cedar, board by board. Every screwhead lined up, because my father would have come back from the grave to complain if they weren't. I pulled a permit for every stage. I passed every inspection. I filed every receipt, every invoice, every lumber slip, in the same weatherproof boxes as my site diaries. Not because I expected a war, because that is what a licensed professional does. People in town stopped calling it the foreclosure by year 3. Now they call it the Holt place. 8 years of my life are inside those walls. It took my family one afternoon to decide that none of that counted. And to understand how they could do that with straight faces, you have to understand my mother's favorite sentence. Elaine Holt has never raised her voice in her life. She has never needed to. My mother arranges things. She arranges casseroles, seating charts, holidays, and people. And by the time you realize you have been arranged, you are already sitting in the chair she picked for you, holding the job she assigned. And her entire system runs on 5 words I have heard since before I could read. Family doesn't keep score. It sounds beautiful, doesn't it? Like a blanket. Family doesn't keep score. She said it when Brooke totaled my first car at 19, and nobody ever mentioned repayment. She said it when cousins stayed in my room for a summer and I slept on a cot in the basement. She said it every time the blanket got passed around, and here is what took me 30 years to see. The blanket only ever moved in one direction. What was Brooke's stayed Brooke's. What was mine circulated. Family doesn't keep score, it turns out, is a sentence that only ever gets said to the person who's winning. And me? I was the family toolbox. When Mom's water heater quit, I drove out with a new one in my truck bed and never sent a bill. When Brooke and Grant bought their house in St. Paul, I spent 3 weekends fixing everything their inspector missed, and Grant stood in the driveway telling neighbors about his contractor connection. 2 winters ago, their furnace died during a cold snap, and I drove 2 hours in the dark with my tools while my own dinner went cold on the counter. Nobody ever offered gas money, and honestly, I never asked. Being needed felt close enough to being loved that I stopped checking the difference between the two. Tell me the truth in the comments. Is there someone in your family whose generosity only flows in one direction, and everyone has agreed to call it love? Because I want you to watch what that arrangement did next. Every job I did got retold at Sunday dinner with the me removed. It was never Maren rewired the basement. It was always, this family takes care of its own. My work went in one end of the story. The story that came out the other end had no me in it. I was the ghost in my own family's gratitude. So now, go back to that 4th of July with me, because you're seeing it with better eyes. The cookout was my idea. I had just finished the deck, and I wanted, God help me, I wanted to show it off to them. Mom brought her coleslaw. Brooke and Grant drove up from St. Paul with my niece Lily, who is 7, and who is the only member of this family whose motives I have never once had to question. Burgers, sweet corn, Grant narrating his golf swing to people who did not ask. It was a good afternoon, right up until my mother reached into her tote bag and came out with a manila folder instead of a dessert. You already heard what she said. Sign it, or, you are not my daughter anymore. You already heard my question. Since when does my house need your signature page? What you haven't heard is what happened in the silence after. My mother did not argue. She smiled. A settled smile. The kind you give someone after the contract is already signed. Closed the folder like she was tucking a child into bed, and said, "It's all right, sweetheart. We'll do this properly at Christmas. All of us together. It's time we got things squared away." Squared away. As if my house were a loose thread on her sweater. The party limped on for another hour, and then, at the grill, while I scraped the grates, Grant made his move. Grant Weller sells insurance and investments in St. Paul. He has a golf tan, a firm handshake, and a voice that is always about to do you a favor. He picked up my tongs like he was helping and said, low and friendly, "Don't take the deed thing so hard. Your mom just wants the family protected. You're single, no kids. God forbid something happens to you. This all turns into a mess." I told him my estate was my business. He chuckled like I'd said something adorable. Then he set down the tongs, patted my shoulder twice, and said the sentence I would replay every night for the next 5 months. "Besides, Maren, this place isn't quite as yours as you think it is." And he walked off to load coolers into his SUV like he had just commented on the weather. I stood on my own deck, watching their taillights climb the county road, and I caught it. That faint, hot, wrong smell you catch behind a wall before anything visibly burns. 18 years on job sites teaches you exactly one thing about that smell. It is never nothing. I am not a woman who smells smoke and goes back to sleep. So that Tuesday night, 2 days after the cookout, I called my mother and asked her straight, "Mom, what did Grant mean? The house isn't as mine as I think it is?" And my mother did what my mother always does. She poured warm water on it. "Oh, honey. Grant only means the family should plan together. You work so hard, and you're all alone out there. Your father would want us protected." "Protected from what?" I asked. She sighed. The sigh she has been aiming at me since middle school. The one that means I was being difficult again. And then she asked whether I was bringing my green bean dish to Thanksgiving, as if the previous sentence had never existed. I called Brooke next. Brooke went the other direction entirely, irritated. "Why are you always so defensive, Maren? Nobody is taking anything from you. It's a family conversation. Why can't we ever just have one of those without you acting like it's an ambush?" I told her that a folder and a pen at a barbecue felt a lot like an ambush. She told me I'd been cold ever since Dad died. Then she had to go, because Lily needed a bath. I wrote both calls down that night in my site diary, word for word, as close as memory allowed. Date, time, who said what. Old habit. When something on a job doesn't add up, you document first and feel later, because feelings fade and paper doesn't. I want you to notice something, because it matters for everything that comes after. I heard the alarm. I did not ignore the alarm. I just had no idea yet which wall the fire was inside. And while I was checking walls, my own life had plans of its own. Here is what nobody at that cookout knew about me. For 3 years, I had been building toward the biggest move of my career. Holt Restoration had more work than one woman could hold. I wanted the old fabrication shop on Route 12, a second truck, and 2 apprentices on payroll. Kids like the kid I used to be. Kids nobody was betting on. I had walked that shop 4 times. I had the apprentice posting saved on my laptop, rewritten so many times it read like a love letter. And that fall, I finally applied for the expansion loan, using the one asset I had spent 8 years turning into gold, the lake house. The loan officer at the credit union practically smiled through the phone. Income strong, credit spotless, house appraising beautifully. The last step is just routine, she said. A title search. Standard. Takes about a week. Remember that word. Routine. Because it took exactly 4 days for my phone to ring, and when it did, my whole life split into a before and an after. I was in a farmhouse kitchen outside Alder Falls, halfway inside a wall with a flashlight in my teeth, when the title company called. The woman on the line introduced herself twice, which should have been my first clue. People only say their name twice when they're about to hand you something heavy. Miss Holt, she said, we've completed the search on your Sparrow Lake property, and we need to clear something up before your loan can proceed. We show a co-owner of record on the title. I actually laughed. I told her that was impossible. I bought that house alone, I said. I've rebuilt it alone. There is no co-owner. There's a quitclaim deed, she said, gently. The way you talk to someone standing near an edge. Recorded this past February. It conveys a 1/2 interest in the property from you to another party. I asked who the other party was. Paper rustled, and then she read my mother's name into the phone. Grantee, Aline Holt. I stood in that stranger's kitchen and looked at the flashlight beam shaking on the wall, and it took me a second to understand the shaking was my hand. There's been a mistake, I said. I never signed anything like that. I have never signed my house over to anyone. And she said the sentence that ended the first 36 years of my life. Ma'am, it's notarized, and it's recorded with the county. I'm looking at it right now. February. 5 months before the 4th of July. 5 months before the folder came out of the tote bag next to the potato salad. Sign it or, you're not my daughter anymore, had never been a demand at all. It was cleanup. The real theft had already happened in the winter, quietly, in an office somewhere, while I was plowing my own driveway and fixing their furnaces. That barbecue wasn't a family losing its temper. It was a family reading from a script that was already on file with the county government. The smile my mother gave me over that folder was not hope. It was a receipt. If you're still with me, do one thing before this next part. Hit the like button and subscribe, because the quiet ones always finish their stories. And mine was just getting started. I climbed out of the wall. I finished the junction I was working on, wire by wire, because that is what you do. The house you're standing in deserves your best work no matter what is happening to your own. And then I sat in my truck in that farmhouse driveway and asked the title company to email me a copy of the deed. It arrived while I sat there. I zoomed in on the signature line with rain starting on the windshield, and I felt the temperature of my blood actually change. Because there was my name, Maren J. Holt, in handwriting that was almost mine. Almost. Whoever made that signature had studied me. I'll give them that much. But I have signed thousands of permits, invoices, and inspection cards since I was 18, and my capital H carries a flaw I put there on purpose as an apprentice. My first foreman taught me to cross it with a long tail that hooks back under the line, so nobody could ever pencil anything in beneath my name on a change order. 18 years. Every signature, the hook is always there. It's in my site diaries, my contracts, my driver's license. The H on that deed had no hook. It was smooth, careful, dead. Handwriting looks a certain way when it has been drawn instead of written. The way a dead man's face looks asleep but isn't. And below my dead signature sat a notary stamp, crisp and official, swearing to the state of Minnesota that I had personally stood in front of him and signed. A name I recognized the second I read it. Pete Sandoval, Grant's golfing buddy. The man who had never once met me in his life. I sat in my truck for a long time, watching rain move across a stranger's field. Then I opened my site diary to a fresh page and wrote 4 words at the top. Follow the load path. The next morning, I drove 40 minutes to the county courthouse and paid $2 for a certified copy of my own betrayal. The Register of Deeds office smells like old paper and toner, and the clerk was kind in the way people are kind at funerals. She printed the whole instrument while I stood at the counter with my hands flat on the wood so they'd have something to do. Quitclaim deed. Grantor, Maren J. Holt. Grantee, Elaine Holt. 1/2 undivided interest in the Sparrow Lake property, conveyed for, and I am quoting the document that stole my house, love and affection, and $1. Love and affection. Whoever drafted it had a sense of humor. At the bottom, my drawn, dead, hookless signature. Beside it, Pete Sandoval's stamp, swearing I had stood in front of him on February 9th. I made myself check my site diary right there at the counter. The week of February 9th, I was doing emergency ice dam repairs on a commercial roof in Brainerd, 90 minutes north. 6 straight days, sunup to dark, documented in my own handwriting with the hooked H on every page and countersigned on the building owner's work orders. On the day I supposedly stood in an office 2 counties away, smiling at a notary I have never met, I was on a frozen roof with a steamer wand, watching my breath turn to frost on my collar. The clerk asked if I needed anything else. I said yes. Certified copies, 2 full sets. She didn't ask why. I didn't tell her that 1 set was for a lawyer I hadn't hired yet. That afternoon, the credit union called with the voice of a woman reading from a script her manager had approved. My expansion loan was paused. Cloud on title, she said. Until the ownership question was resolved, released, or adjudicated, nothing could move. Adjudicated. There's a word you never want in the same sentence as your home address. 3 years of planning went into the ice with 1 phone call. The shop on Route 12 I had walked 4 times. The second truck I had already test-driven. The apprentice posting I had polished like a love letter. Somewhere out there was a kid with worn-out boots who wasn't going to get the phone call I'd been dying to make, and she would never even know why. And I want to be honest with you about what happened next, because it's the entire reason I'm telling this story. Nothing happened. No screaming call to my mother. No crying in the courthouse parking lot. No text with the word betrayal in it. I sat in my truck, opened the diary, and wrote it down like a job. Date, time, event, forged, quitclaim deed discovered, county book and page number recorded. Parties, Elaine Holt, grantee, Pete Sandoval, notary, suspected drafter, Grant Weller. And underneath, the first rule of troubleshooting, the rule that has paid my bills for 18 years. Never assume the fault is where the smoke is. Because think about it, the smoke was a deed with my mother's name on it, but my mother doesn't want a lake house. My mother wants Sunday dinners and obedience. A forged deed is a crime with prison in it. Nobody commits a felony for love and affection and $1. Current has to come from somewhere. Somewhere upstream, something had shorted hard enough to need a lie this size to cover it. My job was to walk the circuit backward until I found the burn mark. So I started with my sister, and I went in soft on purpose. You don't grab a wire to find out if it's live. You test it. I called Brooke on a Sunday while she folded laundry, kept my voice light, and dropped it in sideways. Hey, weird question. Mom keeps talking like the lake house is partly the family's. Where is that coming from? And Brooke didn't miss a beat. No pause, no guilt, nothing. Well, it is, Maren. Mom put Dad's insurance money into that place when you bought it. Almost $100,000. Everybody knows that. I gripped the edge of my counter. Everybody knows. She said it the way you'd say the lake freezes in January. Like it was family weather. A fact she had lived beside for years. I asked, very carefully, when exactly this money was supposed to have changed hands. And she got annoyed with me all over again. When you bought it. Grant handled the whole thing for Mom. He's handled all her paperwork since Dad died. You know that. And honestly, it hurt her that you never once acknowledged it. Never a thank you, never an offer to pay it back. And she never brought it up, not once, because that's how Mom loves people. I heard my sister's voice wobble with real feeling, real hurt, on Mom's behalf, at me, the ungrateful daughter in the story. And that's when the floor of the whole thing opened up under my feet, because I understood something worse than lying. Brooke wasn't lying to me. Brooke was reciting, sometime in the last 8 years, in rooms where I wasn't standing, somebody had rewritten our family's history, and my own sister had memorized the new edition without ever once asking who the author was. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever listened to someone you love recite a memory you know for a fact never happened, and realize they believe it with their whole heart? Tell me in the comments, because standing in my kitchen that Sunday, I genuinely thought I was losing my mind. The question stopped being, what does my family believe? The question became, who wrote the first draft, and why did he need it written? For family history that hasn't been edited, you go to my Aunt Jo. My dad's younger sister, 64, retired postmaster, sharp as a utility knife, and constitutionally incapable of pretending a casserole ever fixed anything. I drove out to her place with a box of cider donuts and asked about Dad's insurance money, and Jo talked, because Jo always talks straight. $200,000, she confirmed, paid to your mother within 2 months of the funeral. And Grant was on it like a gull on a boat sandwich. Some annuity product his firm sells. Said he'd grow it so Elaine would never have to worry. Your mother signed whatever that man put in front of her. She always lets the men handle the paperwork, honey. Her father raised her that way, and your father never managed to untrain it. I asked, carefully, whether Grant had ever had money trouble of his own. Jo snorted into her coffee. The storage units. Excuse me? The storage unit development outside Sreet. Paul, 5 years back. He went in with a college buddy, strutted around one Thanksgiving calling himself a developer. Then the whole thing went under. And suddenly nobody was allowed to mention it. Brooke told me once they'd had a rough stretch. Then, she hushed up like she'd left the stove on. I drove home along the lake with my hands quiet on the wheel and the arithmetic doing itself in the dark. A pot of my father's money that Grant controlled, a failed investment nobody could mention, and a forged deed, aged and recorded, quietly turning my house into the family's replacement asset. I couldn't prove the connection yet, but 18 years of tracing faults had taught me what I was looking at. Somewhere in that annuity, there was a hole shaped exactly like my lake house. Now, I needed someone who could turn what I smelled into something a judge could read. Nadia Brandt's office sits above a hardware store in Fern Rapids, which felt like a sign from the universe. 25 years of real estate litigation, reading glasses on a chain, and a habit of reading everything twice before she says one word. I slid the certified copies across her desk, and she went through them with a mechanical pencil, flagging pages, silent for 10 full minutes, while the floor below us sold paint and pipe fittings. Then she looked up over the glasses and said, "First, breathe." A forged deed conveys nothing. In Minnesota, in basically every state in this country, a forged conveyance is void from the moment it's signed. Not voidable. Void. It doesn't matter that it's notarized. It doesn't matter that it's recorded. In the eyes of the law, it never happened. Your mother owns exactly as much of your house as the raccoons do. Then why, I asked, is my loan frozen over something that never happened? And she gave me a thin smile I would come to love. Because void doesn't mean invisible. That deed is sitting in the public record like mold behind fresh drywall. Everyone who searches your title is going to find it, and nobody can pretend it isn't there. It stays there, poisoning everything, until a judge orders it out. That's the lawsuit. It's called a quiet title action. We ask the court to declare the deed a forgery, void from inception, and strike it from your record. And given what you've shown me, we add a second claim called slander of title. They published a false document against your property, and that publication has cost you real, countable money. Your frozen loan, your shop, your second truck. That's not hurt feelings, Miss Holt. That's damages. Then she laid out what winning requires. Proof the signature is forged, which meant handwriting comparison and my alibi. Proof the $100,000 family legend was fiction. which meant bank records going back 8 years, and the notary. She tapped his stamp with her pencil. The notary is the soft spot. A notary is required to verify you, in person, with identification, and log it in a journal. If Pete Sandoval stamped that acknowledgement without you standing in front of him, he committed misconduct that can cost him his commission. And men like that protect their little stamps the way dragons protect gold. She quoted the retainer. $8,000. Almost exactly the down payment on the truck I was no longer buying. I wrote the check without blinking, and she asked me one last question with her glasses off. Does your mother know the deed is forged? I said I honestly didn't know. Brant clicked her pencil twice. In my experience, with mothers, the question is rarely what they know. It's what they have decided not to know. Then she asked how much documentation I had, and for the first time in that whole rotten month, I smiled. The next morning, I carried 2 weatherproof boxes up the stairs, past the paint displays, and set 18 years of my life on her conference table. The site diaries every working day since I was 18, in my own hooked handwriting. Every permit on the lake house with the county's own date stamps, every inspection card, receipts sorted by year, down to the cedar for the dock, and the bank records I'd printed the night before, the savings account I fed from age 18, the $27,000 cashier's check for my down payment, drawn from that account and no other, and 8 years of statements on every account I own, showing one thing with beautiful, boring clarity. No $100,000 ever arrived. Not as a lump. Not in pieces. Not from my mother. Not ever. Brant paged through it all and said something I want every underestimated woman hearing my voice to write down. You can forge a signature. You cannot forge the absence of money. That afternoon, I made the decision that shaped everything after. No confrontation. No warning shots. I would not call my mother crying. I would not storm Brooke's kitchen. I would not give Grant Weller one twitch of the panic that teaches a cornered man to start shredding paper. I would stay exactly the daughter they had on file. Helpful, quiet, a little cold since the cookout, nothing more. Thanksgiving came, and I brought my green bean dish, and I passed the gravy, and when my mother squeezed my hand at the door and said, "Christmas, sweetheart, we'll get everything squared away," I squeezed back and said, "I'm counting on it." And I was. Meanwhile, Brant went to work on the soft spot. She wrote Pete Sandoval a letter, polite, letterhead, asking him to kindly confirm the circumstances of the notarization, the date, the identification he examined, the entry in his journal. His first reply was lawyer-shaped fog. He notarizes many documents. He doesn't recall specifics. Brant answered with one paragraph that mentioned the state's notary statutes, the words revocation and referral, and a 14-day deadline. He called her office in 6. He'd signed as a favor, he admitted. Grant had brought him a stack of family paperwork after their Saturday round, said everyone had already signed, everything was agreed, it was just housekeeping. So Dale stamped it at his golf buddy's word. He had never met me, not once, not in his life. He put all of it in a sworn affidavit to keep his license breathing. Paper trail, check. Money trail, check. The circuit was tracing clean. And then, in late November, the last wire walked itself into my hands, the way it sometimes does when a job decides it's ready to be finished. My mother's kitchen faucet started leaking, and she called me to fix it. Of course she did. The daughter preparing a lawsuit in December is still the daughter with the tools in November. And I came. Because the part of me that answers that phone will be the last part of me to die. The faucet took 15 minutes. On my way out through the den, I passed the little desk where Grant's paperwork has lived since Dad died, and the file box was sitting there with the lid off, in plain sight. I didn't open a single drawer. I didn't pick a single lock. I photographed what was lying on top, because 3 lines had already grabbed my eye and would not let go. An annuity statement. Writing agent Grant Weller. Under it, surrender confirmation letters. Years of them. Each one with a penalty line. Each one authorized by the neat, steady, ruler-straight signature of Elaine Holt. And here's the thing. I have watched my mother sign birthday cards and checks at that kitchen table my whole life. Her hand has trembled since Dad died, and it gets worse every winter. Her real E leans left like a fence post in soft ground. These E's stood at attention. Every one, every year, identical. At home, I laid my photos beside the forged deed, and the handwriting told one story twice. Then I ran the sums against what Aunt Jo remembered, and the surrenders came to roughly $160,000, drained out in the exact seasons Grant's storage units were going under. He hadn't forged my name once. He had been forging hers for years. So the question I carried into December was the one I couldn't answer with paper. Was my mother his victim, or his silent partner in never asking? Every family has someone whose job is to not look at things. I needed to know which one of them was steering. And for that, I needed something my boxes couldn't give me. I needed his voice. Here's the dry little fact this entire next part turns on. Minnesota is a one-party consent state. Brandt confirmed it before I moved a muscle. If I am part of the conversation, I can lawfully record it. No permission needed. No warning required. The law assumes that a conversation belongs to the people inside it, which, if you think about it, is more than my family ever assumed about my house. So the first week of December, I called Grant and asked him to meet me for coffee in St. Paul. Just us. I want to get to a good place before Christmas, I told him, and I let my voice sag exactly enough in the middle. He couldn't say yes fast enough. He picked the coffee shop around the corner from his office, the one with the glass wall where the guys from his firm could walk past and see him being generous to his difficult sister-in-law. He ordered a caramel something with a swirl on the lid and spent 5 minutes telling me about his drive. Then he leaned in, warm as a space heater, and did what men like Grant always do when they believe they've already won. He explained it to me. Look, Mare, nobody wants a war here. The deed is real enough where it counts, okay? Christmas. You sign the family agreement. Your mom's half rolls into the family arrangement, and honestly, you are not out $1. It's paperwork. It just makes everything make sense on paper. For your mom's peace of mind. You keep living there. Nothing changes. Everybody exhales. I asked him quietly how the deed could be real enough when I never signed it, and he smiled. He actually smiled, leaned back, and said, word for word, your signature. Close enough is good enough for family. Come on. Nobody is ever looking at that paper again after Christmas. It's cleanup, that's all. Cleanup. My father's insurance. His dead storage units. My forged name. Cleanup. I asked one more question, because the phone in my chest pocket had room for it. And if I don't sign at Christmas? He stirred his caramel swirl, shrugged, and delivered the closing line of his own career. Then your mom's attorney enforces her half. Partition sale. The county auctions the whole place and splits the money. You'd lose that house over pride, Maren. Don't make it ugly. I thanked him for the coffee. I drove home up the interstate, with his voice sitting safe in my phone like a live wire in a labeled junction box, and I did not turn the radio on once. People ask me why I didn't scream at him right there, with his colleagues walking past the glass. Because screaming is free, and I had decided, somewhere between the courthouse and the hardware store stairs, that this was going to cost them. If you have ever swallowed your anger and taken notes instead, tell me in the comments right now, because I need to know I'm not the only one built this way. And if you're new here, subscribe. The bill in this story comes due at Christmas dinner, and you are going to want a seat. 2 days after that coffee, the mailbox at the end of my driveway fired the next shot. Cream paper. A law firm in Minneapolis I'd never heard of, addressing me like a stranger, which, credit where it's due, was the most honest thing my family had put in writing all year. Co-ownership of the Sparrow Lake property. Their client held an undivided 1/2 interest of record. I was invited to either execute the family ownership agreement or purchase their client's interest at fair market value by December 31st. Failure to do so would leave their client no choice but to pursue all available remedies, including an action for partition and sale. Their client, Elaine Holt. My mother had hired a lawyer to force the sale of her daughter's home by New Year's. The house, her husband's granddaughter someday. The house, with his memorial light burning over the water. Squared away. And while that letter was still in the mail, the other half of the machine was already running, because that same week my phone started warming up. First, a cousin, just calling to check in. who worked her way around to how hard this whole thing has been on your poor mother. Then my great aunt, calling from Arizona, 81 years old, and genuinely pained. Maren, honey, whatever has gone on, it's only a house. Family is family. Just sign your mother's papers. Somewhere between the pot roast and the law firm, my mother had rolled out the family edition of events, the one where Dad's money had bought my house and I had grown too proud to admit it. My name was being quietly rewired in a dozen kitchens across 3 states, and there was no version of the truth I could tell that didn't sound like an ungrateful daughter hurling accusations at a grieving widow, so I didn't tell any version at all. I said, "I love you, Aunt Carol. I'll see you in the spring." And I hung up, and I punched the demand letter into the front section of the binder for Brant's paralegal to scan in the morning. Because here is something they don't teach you, and I learned it that week. A demand letter built on a forged deed isn't pressure. It's evidence with a postmark. They wanted me cornered before Christmas. They forgot what I do for a living. Corners are where you install the main panel. Brant read the letter twice, took her glasses off, and said, "They've just done us an enormous favor. They have asserted the forged deed, in writing, through counsel, with a deadline. Slander of title doesn't get cleaner than this. We file now." And so, in the second week of December, in a courthouse server 40 minutes from my kitchen, a case caption came into existence with my mother's name under the word defendant. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before any of that could happen, my phone rang at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. 11:47 is not a Brooke hour. Brooke is asleep by 10, always has been, since we were kids, sharing a bedroom wall. I stood at my kitchen window, looking at the frozen lake, phone buzzing on the counter with my sister's name on the screen. And I knew, before I ever picked it up, that something in her house had finally cracked. Her voice came out small in a way I hadn't heard in 30 years. "Mare," she said, "Grant told me you signed the deed back in February. You did sign it, right?" And there it was. At last. A question mark. The first one my sister had spent on any of this in 8 years. I stood at that frozen window with my sister's question in my ear, and I felt the old pull, the family pull, the one that says, dump everything, tell her all of it, the hookless H, the roof in Brainerd, Sandoval's affidavit, the recording sleeping in my phone, and then I heard Brant's voice in my head, calm as a level bubble. Not yet, not through her. She sleeps next to him. So I gave my sister one sentence to take to bed instead. I said, "Brooke, ask him to describe the office where I signed it. Ask him what color the walls were." Silence. Long enough that I could hear their refrigerator humming 90 miles away. Because Brooke knew, the way wives know, that Grant had never once mentioned an office, or a signing, or a single detail with weather in it. And liars can build you a story, but they cannot build you a room. When she finally spoke, she wasn't defending anybody anymore. She was somewhere out past that, in open water. "Whatever you think you have to do," she said, "please, please don't do anything crazy at Christmas. Lily will be there." And I told her the truest sentence. I said, all December, "Brooke, I am not the one you should be saying that to." After she hung up, I stood watching snow start over the lake, and the job changed shape on me. The house was going to survive Christmas. Brant had seen to that. But there was going to be a 7-year-old in my living room while the grown-ups took the family apart. A little girl who had been promised things by people spending money that wasn't theirs. Whatever I did at that table, I decided right there I would do it in a way Lily never had to watch. Write that down if you're ever in a war with people you love. You can win everything and still protect the one innocent person in the room. Those two things are not in conflict. They never were. 2 days later, in Brant's conference room, the complaint sat squared on the table like a finished set of blueprints, and the caption read exactly the way she had warned me it would. Maren J. Holt Plaintiff versus Elaine Holt, Grant Weller, and Peter Sandoval, defendants. My mother's name under that word. I read it top to bottom twice. Quiet title, slander of title, declaration that the deed was void, a forged legal nothing. Every count true, every count mine. Brant took her glasses off and asked the only question in the whole file with no exhibit attached to it. Maren. The caption will read Holt versus Holt. Can you carry that? I didn't answer her yet. I took the question to the one person alive who knew my mother before she was my mother. Aunt Jo poured coffee, listened to me get half a sentence out, and then told me a story I had never heard in 36 years. 1985, she said. Your mom was 23. Your grandfather called her into the kitchen of the old resort property up on Base Lake, set a paper on the table, and told her to sign. The land was going to her brother, all of it. The cabins, the shoreline, everything their mother had cooked and cleaned for 30 summers to keep. The girls were expected to sign off their shares. That's just how his people did it. Daughters don't hold land, he told her. Daughters marry into it. I asked what Mom did. Jo turned her cup a slow half circle. She signed it. Honey, what else? Then she walked out and stood on the dock for about an hour, by herself, in April. No coat. And when she came back inside, she was the Elaine you grew up with. Started talking about family the way drowning people talk about water. Your grandfather took her name off the land, and she spent the next 40 years making sure no one in this family ever owned anything alone again. Now she's the one holding the pen. And I honestly don't think she can tell anymore whether she's collecting a debt or paying one. I sat in my truck outside Jo's place for a long time with the heater ticking. And I'll tell you the truth about what happened in that cab, because this story is worthless if I only tell you the strong parts. The need got loose, 36 years of it. It made its case in my mother's voice. It said, "It's only paper. You've rebuilt bigger wrecks than her. Sign something, absorb it, keep your mother." And I sat with that until my hands went cold on the wheel. And what answered it, in the end, wasn't anger. It was my father's voice, on a roof, 20 years ago. The bubble doesn't lie, kiddo. People will. The bubble won't. The truth of that deed sat dead off center, and no amount of love was going to drag it level. I drove to Fern Rapids, and I signed the verification. Brant's paralegal filed it electronically before I had my coat back on. Holt versus Holt began to exist, time-stamped, real, no longer a thing I could take back by being sweet at dinner. The same afternoon, a second envelope went out, to the State Commerce Department that licenses insurance agents, with the annuity statements and that parade of ruler-straight signatures attached. And then Brant did the thing I'll admire until I die. She held service back like a stage manager. No sheriff's deputy would hand anyone papers until December 26th. The dinner is their last chance to pick the easy version, she said. That's a gift, whether they see it or not. So I offered to host Christmas Eve, and the offer went over like free money. Of course they said yes. To them, it meant the stubborn one had finally softened. Better yet, it meant the signing could happen inside the house itself, which Grant probably found poetic. Mom called it lovely and said she'd bring the ham, and told me, warmly, maybe even sincerely, that Dad would be so happy we were finally settling things. I spent the 23rd cooking like it was a real Christmas, because for one person in that house, it was going to be Lily was coming. So, the good tablecloth, cocoa on the stove, a gingerbread kit on the coffee table, white lights on the porch, every strand of them wired by me, and in the kitchen drawer, under the potholders, waited the other Christmas. My binder, tabbed and ordered. 2 brown envelopes with Brant's letterhead inside. My phone, charged full. The recording cued and tested twice. Brant herself on call until 10. Her cell number in my back pocket like a fire extinguisher. They arrived at 6, smiling. All of them smiling. Even me. And for 2 hours, I swear to you, it was almost a family. The ham was good. Lily built her gingerbread house and taxed every candy roof heavily. Grant poured wine and narrated a golf story. Mom said my scalloped potatoes were nearly as good as hers, which in Elaine currency is a medal with a ribbon. Then, at 8 o'clock, with the cocoa steaming, I watched my mother catch Grant's eye across my table and nod, the smallest arrangement of the evening. And Grant wiped his mouth, walked to his coat, and came back carrying a leather folder with a zipper. He set it down next to the gravy boat, like a 5th dish. And he turned the pen so it pointed at me. So, he said, warm as ever. Mayor, before it gets late. Family ownership agreement, clean and simple. Your mom's interest rolls into the family arrangement, Brooke goes on the deed with you, the lawyers stand down, and this beautiful place becomes what it's always really been. Ours. He unzipped the folder. The papers inside were laser crisp, little sticky tabs marking every place I was meant to sign. And across my own tablecloth sat that fat silver pen, pointed at me like the business end of something. I stood up, and I heard my voice come out the way it does on a job site when something is about to get shut off. Before anyone signs anything, I have 2 envelopes of my own. But first things first, I walked to the living room, crouched next to the gingerbread house, and told Lily the upstairs TV had the good Christmas movies, and that the candy bowl was hers to take, the whole thing. Brooke understood before I finished the sentence. Mothers hear a room change pressure. She took Lily up herself, tucked her in with the volume generous, and came back down with her arms crossed over her sweater like a woman walking out into weather. I will always give my sister that. She came back down. Then I opened the kitchen drawer and set the evening's real place settings on the table next to Grant's leather folder. The binder. 2 brown envelopes. And I opened the binder to the first tab and turned it to face them. This is a certified copy of a quitclaim deed recorded against this house in February. It gives you, Mom, half of everything I own, in exchange for, and I'm quoting, love and affection, and $1. This is the signature on it. It's a nice signature. It isn't mine. Grant started up out of his chair. Now, hold on. If you're going to wave papers around, yeah. And I set the next tab down without raising my voice at all. Signed work orders. 6 days of emergency roof repairs in Brainerd. 90 minutes north. Sunrise to dark. Countersigned by the building owner. On the day I supposedly stood in Pete Sandoval's office, I was on a frozen roof in another county with a steam wand in my hands. My mother's fingers were laced on the tablecloth, but her thumbs had stopped being still. Grant reached for the binder. I slid it 6 inches out of his range, the way you move a glass from a man who's had enough, and said, I'm not finished. Next tab. Pete Sandoval signed a sworn affidavit 3 weeks ago. He has never met me, Grant. Not once in his life. He says you brought him a stack of family paperwork after golf and told him everyone had already signed, and he stamped it as a favor. He put that in writing to keep his license. Grant's tan started working alone. The skin underneath had gone to drywall. Then there's the money, I said, and laid down the bank tab. 8 years of statements. Every account I have. Mom's $100,000 never arrived. Not as a lump. Not in pieces. Not ever. You can forge a signature. You cannot forge money that never moved. And then I took out my phone, set it flat in the middle of the tablecloth like a trivet, and pressed play. 20 seconds. His own voice. Cheerful. Caramel smooth. Filling my dining room. Your signature. Close enough is good enough for family. Nobody is ever looking at that paper again after Christmas. It's cleanup. That's all. Grant came out of his chair so fast it went over backward, and the crash rolled through the house like a breaker slamming. You recorded me? That's illegal. You can't. One-party consent, I said. Minnesota. I was the one party. Check with your lawyer. You'll have one by Friday. But here's the thing I noticed. The thing I will remember on my last day on this earth. My mother was not looking at the phone. She was looking at the last thing I had laid down. Photographs of annuity surrender forms. Years of withdrawals from my dead father's money. Each one authorized by an Elaine Holt, whose signature stood ruler straight, while her real hand has trembled worse every winter of her widowhood. She looked at $160,000 of Ray Holt's life, drained through her own stolen name, and for the first time in my life, I watched my mother's face get old. Then she closed it, like a shop for the night. She rose the way she rises at the end of Thanksgiving, hostess straight, gathering the room to herself, and she looked past the binder, past Grant sweating over the table, past her own forged name lying face up under the chandelier, and she said it with no heat at all, which is how I knew she meant it as law. If you do this to this family, you are not my daughter anymore. The room stopped. Brooke's head came around. Grant froze mid-reach like a man in musical chairs, and I stood at the head of my own table and finally saw the whole thing plainly. She had watched the evidence come down layer by layer, the forged deed, the drained annuity, her own stolen hand, and the crime she chose to name was mine, the disobedience. She would forgive the man who robbed her before the daughter who proved it, because that was the house style, the one her father taught her on a dock in April of 1985, with a paper and a pen and a sentence about what daughters don't hold. For one breath, I saw her standing out there at 23, no coat, and I understood I had spent 36 years being billed for a debt she was never once allowed to say out loud. Then I picked up my own pen from the kitchen drawer, not his fat silver one, slid it across the tablecloth to Grant, and heard my voice come out level and done. Then I guess I was never your daughter, just the family toolbox. And tonight, I'm closing the lid. I put the first brown envelope in front of Grant. Envelope A. My lawyer wrote it. A confession and settlement. You admit you fabricated the deed, in a form we can record. So the county file gets scrubbed of your fingerprints. You self-report to the state within 30 days. And you pay my mother back the $160,000 you bled out of Dad's annuity. On a schedule, every dollar. In exchange, I drop my damages claim, and I don't spend one more calorie helping the county attorney find you interesting. Then the second envelope, in the middle of the table, for everyone. Envelope B is a courtesy copy. Holt versus Holt, filed 6 days ago. It's already alive. A deputy serves it the day after tomorrow, no matter what happens to this ham. Tonight only decides how it ends. Grant cycled through his whole catalog. The bluster, no court takes your word over family. The bargaining, okay, look, the deed goes away tonight. Clean slate. And finally, quieter, with his tie crooked. Something close to honest. The units were already under, Mayor. I was going to put it all back. It was family money. It wasn't stealing. And from the kitchen doorway, my sister spoke for the first time all night, with gravel in her voice I had never heard. The storage units, Brooke said. You told me my mother carried us through that year. Grant shut his eyes, and that sound you couldn't hear was 12 years of a marriage recalculating. Brooke walked to the table, set envelope A squarely in front of her husband, and put her hand flat on top of it. Sign it. Or I will drive her to the county attorney myself, and I will carry the binder. He signed all 4 places. And his signature, I noticed, came out shaky and alive. The only honest one on any piece of paper in this entire story. My mother took her coat off the hook, stopped for 1 second in front of the wreath on my door, and walked out into the snow without turning around. The door clicked. That was all. The house went quiet the way it does after a breaker trips. One hard thud. Then nothing but everything still standing. 9 weeks later, on a gray Thursday in March, a judge signed the order in Holt versus Holt. The deed was declared what it had always been, a forgery, a void legal nothing, struck from my title like it never breathed. And the county record went back to saying the one true thing it had said for 8 years. This house belongs to Maren J. Holt. Grant's recorded confession made it a stipulation, not a trial. Nobody testified. Nobody's Christmas got subpoenaed. My loan closed in April. The shop on Route 12 has my name over the door now. The second truck is white and ugly and perfect. And in May, a 19-year-old named Tasha, with paint-stained boots and a dead serious notebook, became Holt Restoration's first apprentice. She writes everything down. I never even had to tell her. Grant self-reported, per the agreement, and by summer his license was gone, because it turns out regulators read confessions all the way to the end. He pays my mother back monthly, on a schedule with teeth in it. Brooke took Lily to her own place for a while, and I don't know what happens to that marriage, and it is not my circuit to trace. What I know is that my sister calls before she visits now. Asks instead of assumes. Shows up some Saturdays with coffee and safety glasses. Learning which end of a chisel is which. Rebuilding with boundaries is slower than believing. It also actually holds. My mother has not spoken to me since the door clicked. She cashed Grant's first repayment check. I know that much. And at Easter, she told a table full of relatives her side of a story I have stopped auditing. Some of them believe her. I let them. I spent my whole life trying to win a case in a courtroom that was never going to seat me, and I am out of filings. She kept her word, is how I've come to think of it. It's the first bill she ever sent me, honestly. And then, in May, on the first warm Saturday, Lily stood on my dock throwing bread to fish that don't need it. And out of nowhere, the way kids drop grenades, she asked, "Grandma said this house was going to be ours someday. Is it?" I sat down on the warm cedar next to her, and I took my father's wooden level down from the boathouse wall, the long one with the brass ends, and I put it in her hands. "One day, sweetheart, you're going to build something of your very own," I said, "and I'm going to teach you how to check that it's true." She turned it over, weighed it, the way you weigh a real thing against a promised one, and then she asked if we could build something right now. So we spent the afternoon making a birdhouse for the shoreline, her holding the level dead steady, me driving the screws, and when we finished, we both signed the site diary. 2 entries, 2 names. Hers has a little flower on the end. Give it 15 years, and God help anyone who ever puts a pen in front of that girl. I spent 36 years believing love was a job I could finish if I just kept showing up with my tools. But a house needs your name on it, and any love that demands your name off of things was never love. It was rent. That's my story. 1 forged page, 18 years of notebooks, and a Christmas dinner where the bill finally arrived. If this story reminded you to pull your own title records, or to stop paying rent on a love that was never coming, take it as your sign, and do it this week. Share this video with someone who keeps the lights on for everyone else and gets thanked by being handed more work. Tell me in the comments what you would have done at that table. Hit subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you in the next story.